I remember reading once that revenge is never cold. It is slow, infused, until it becomes the normal temperature of your blood. If you're still here, if you can hear the rain drumming against the glass, stay. Hit subscribe. You wouldn't want to miss the moment the mask drops. They gathered around the office cake. It was a cheap frosting disaster, cerulean white and tasting of pure sugar, sitting on the solid oak conference table. The fluorescent lights on the 47th floor, in this corner of Chicago, made everything feel too clinical, even the forced joy. Edward Hawthorne, my manager for 4.5 years, stood in the center, one hand resting on his wife's shoulder. A woman I barely knew, but whose smile seemed as frozen and expensive as the pearls around her neck. They gathered around the office cake, congratulating my manager for 25 years of loyalty. 25 years. A quarter-century spent building this empire of glass and steel, climbing over the backs of others, mine included, but mostly hers. They were applauding. A dry, nervous noise. A symphony of convenience that echoed in the room like hammer blows on a marble slab. I saw Edward's face, flushed with a mixture of feigned emotion and flawless pride. He was tall, with that perfectly styled silver-gray hair that inspired confidence in clients and terror in junior analysts. He was the epitome of success that my sister, Meredith, had always dreamed of. I waited. I waited until the last palm slap faded, until the silence, heavy and precarious, settled, broken only by the sound of a plastic spoon scraping the cake's cardboard box. My heart wasn't beating. It was merely pulsing, a precise, emotionless clockwork mechanism. I'd rehearsed this moment hundreds of times in the dead of night, in the lingering smell of cold coffee on my desk, in the empty echo of my West Loop apartment. Every detail was etched. I waited until they finished clapping. Then I moved. My movement was slow, deliberate. I walked through the small crowd, faces shining with sweat and boredom, towards the table. Edward looked at me, his smile shifting slightly into an expression of polite anticipation. I was Julian Thorne, the quiet analyst, the one who delivered the impeccable numbers, the one expected to offer nothing more than a respectful nod. "Edward," I said, my voice flat, almost inaudible, yet it cut across the room. I noticed time had suspended for half a second. That was the effect I wanted, the breaking of routine. "I prepared a little something, a special report." His eyebrow lifted. The amusement in his eyes was palpable. He was expecting a joke, an embarrassing slide from his youth, something light and ironic to cap the ceremony. I bent down to a large, flat box I had brought in earlier that morning, pretending it contained corporate files for an imminent audit. I took out a stack of papers, perfectly aligned, printed on the firm's best paper, a weight and texture that demanded to be taken seriously. Then I passed out copies of the report. There was one for every person present, 15 folders, 15 pairs of eyes to read the truth I had distilled over 4 years of patient effort. I started with his wife, who held it awkwardly between her pearls and her slice of cake. Her gaze, initially curious, quickly morphed into icy confusion. Then I gave the report to the Human Resources Director, who immediately stopped smiling. Edward's folder I kept for last. I placed it right next to the huge 25 sculpted into the frosting, the weight of the paper slightly displacing a paper plate. "What is this, Julian?" Edward asked. His voice had hardened. The benevolence evaporated. There was a threat beneath the surface. I didn't answer him. I let the room do its work. The silence was no longer precarious. It was deadly. I watched his wife's eyes scan the first page. I watched the HR director rapidly flip through the pages, his face draining from red to ashen white. They weren't just reading, they were taking in, understanding the chilling scale of the documentation. The title was simple: Pattern Analysis of Termination Events, 1999 to 24. I remembered the smell of cold coffee. There was a cup near the wall, forgotten by an overly zealous analyst, its contents stagnant. It was the smell of negligence and oblivion that took me back 6 years. Flashback. 6 years ago, the rain in Seattle was different from the rain in Chicago. It was fine, persistent, seeping into your bones. I held Meredith's hand, my sister, on a wet bench. Hers was cold, but she squeezed mine as if holding on to the little hope she had left. She was beautiful, even there, the life draining from her usually vibrant eyes. She held a small envelope from the firm, Ascend Capital, the same one where I worked now. It was the termination letter. She had just returned from maternity leave. Her son, little Oliver, was 3 months old. They had assured her that her senior portfolio manager position was waiting for her. Edward Hawthorne, personally, had reassured her. "It's a restructuring, Julian," she had whispered, her voice a broken murmur. "They said they needed greater flexibility on the team." I knew. It was the polite formula, the corporate code for "you are a mother now, you are no longer entirely ours." But she was more than just an employee. She was on par with Hawthorne. Her numbers were exceptional. She had been fired for no reason other than simple cruelty and calculation. I read the letter. Edward Hawthorne's name was at the bottom. A neat, elegant signature. The same one I had seen on his memos, on his flattering emails. At that moment, under the Seattle rain, revenge ceased to be an abstract thought. It became the only viable path to clean air. End of flashback. I returned to the present. The silence had deepened, thick as old molasses. Edward had opened the report. He read it, standing under the scrutiny of everyone. The first page was the introduction, a sterile methodology that explained how I had analyzed over 300 termination cases over 25 years. Page 2 contained the highlights, the correlation, statistically indisputable, between a female employee's return from maternity or parental leave and her termination within 90 days. The spike was alarming. The evidence was overwhelming. Page 3, the name of the HR manager who processed each case. He was there in front of me, reading his own role in the pattern. He was the lever. Pages 4 to 10. The graphs, the pie charts, the histograms, the cold elegance of mathematical truth. And starting on page 11, the list. A chronological list. Each line detailed a case. Employee name, date of hire, start date of parental leave, termination date, official reason. One name returned like a morbid refrain in the responsible party column. Edward Hawthorne. "Julian," Edward hissed. He never used my first name. It was always Thorne. That meant I had reached him. You've lost your mind? This is defamation." His face was pale, but the corner of his mouth was twitching, revealing the only emotion I expected. Fear. Not anger. Not indignation. The fear of the fall. I tilted my head slightly, a polite gesture. "No. Edward, these are data. Facts I extracted from the internal HR database, cross-referencing dates and reason codes." He scanned the room, seeking support. His wife was still looking at the page, her pearls reflecting the light. The HR director closed his folder, his hands sweaty. The others, my colleagues, the ones who had been applauding him a minute ago, looked at me with a mixture of horror and secret fascination. They were reading, and with each employee name, they remembered a woman who had vanished from the office. And there, in the middle of the room, I spoke the sentence I had rehearsed for nights. Every time he fired a mother after maternity leave. I took a deep breath, smelling the sweet vanilla and the fear. "Page 27, Edward," I said softly. "Page 27 contains the summary of the termination letters." Edward turned the pages, his hands slightly crumpling the heavy paper. He found the section, and there, below each case summary, I had inserted the visual proof, a digitized copy of the official termination letter. All signed by him. It wasn't a single document he could brush away. It was an unbroken chain of signatures over a 25-year period, ending with Meredith's case. Each signature was a link, a brick in the wall I had built around him. He couldn't blame HR. His name was on the letterhead. His signature was the final authority. "Thorne," Edward said. His voice was no longer a hiss, but a low growl. "You've ruined your own career. When the board sees this, they'll erase you. You're an unethical whistleblower." "I'm not a whistleblower," I said calmly. I felt tired, incredibly tired. The tension had consumed my last reserves. I am a consequence. I glanced at Edward's wife. Her eyes were no longer fixed on the cake or the pearls, but on her husband. Then, on page 27, which contained Meredith's case. She knew Meredith. I remembered seeing them once at a company party. Edward had introduced Meredith as his rising star. The betrayal was everywhere. "Why now?" Edward asked. He had dropped the paper cutter and grabbed my wrist, a quick panicked gesture. "Why wait for my anniversary?" I gently pulled my arm away. This was the question I was waiting for. I looked at the 25 on the cake. Irony was a double-edged sword, and I liked the taste of blood. Twist, revelation. "Edward," I said, my tone a whisper, the same tone a doctor uses to deliver a diagnosis. "The 25 years of loyalty we are celebrating today is a lie. But what you don't know is that I started my own countdown exactly 25 years ago. You see, Meredith wasn't your first target from our family. She was the second. The first was my mother, your secretary, Helen Thorne. You fired her 3 months after my older brother was born back in 1999. She was the very first entry in that report. She died of lung cancer 2 years later, the stress having done the rest. I was 14, Edward. 25 years later, this isn't your anniversary. It's the exact duration of my project. You haven't celebrated a career. You have attended the end of a cycle that you yourself began." Edward's face had turned into a wax mask, his eyes struggling to recall a secretary from a quarter-century ago. He remembered my mother. He remembered the case. I turned away and walked toward the exit, my stride steady. My back, which had been hunched under the weight of guilt and secrecy all these years, straightened. I let the conference room door close softly. I left behind the smell of cake, the deadly silence, and the man whose empire had just collapsed like a house of cards. The silence returned, but this time, it is not absence, it is the weight of a finished truth. If this story left a scar on your mind, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and let me tell you how you live after the fall.